And those three elements are language, fixing behavior, and self-awareness. For me, those three elements are really key. And I will deep dive into all three of them a bit more with a bit more detail, and per theme or element, I will give you also a tool that you can use. But language, fixing behavior, and self-awareness were for me the three main ingredients to change my behavior as a manager. I've been a manager, all sorts of roles. I've been team leads, people lead roles. So it doesn't really matter what type of manager or leader you are in an organization. For me, it tends to fall back on these three elements quite often. And once I was more self-aware of that these three elements could influence people so much in how they view the world and how they act and react, gave me the pretty much the tools to say, like, hey, if we only focus on these really small, tiny pieces of our own behavior, then we can at least create already a ripple effect that we can build up in our organization. Because if you start looking at getting new frameworks into place or processes into place, often if you are a manager in your organization, you might recognize this, but it's often quite of a battle to get it all done in your organization. Plus, it's quite of a journey to get everyone on board. So I would highly advise to just see if you can do anything with these three elements, because it's pretty much something that you can do within an hour. And I'm really keen at the end of the presentation, I will give you the moment to just give me the feedback on it and your comments and your thoughts on it. And I'm really curious how you react to it. So the first one is language, like I mentioned. So often we find ourselves as a traditional management role in an organization that we often are reactive in how we use our language. So we tend to fall back in, you need to do this, or I need to do this. You can also reflect it back to yourself. And it's a lot to do with a reactive way of using your language. What that reactive way of communication means and does in your body is quite interesting to understand, because if you understand what it does with reactive wording, then you also start to understand what it does with proactive wording. So from reactive wording to proactive wording is pretty much taking into account what kind of words you use in order to have a conversation with somebody. Reactive triggers often your external motivation. External motivation works for some people, but most of the time it doesn't work for a lot of us. External motivation comes from something outside of yourself, gives you the push to change. So it either creates a pain or it is somebody that tells you to change. If that starts happening, your motivation slightly changes from a proactive and a positive view to a more reactive, negative view. And it's quite hard to use that motivation to actually change your behavior. If we use proactive language, you can start thinking about the wording like, you could, or would I do this, or a bit of more loving and caring language towards yourself. But that often changes your external motivation into an internal motivation. And internal motivation is reflected to something that is good for you. And what I mentioned before is that if somebody tells you that you need to change, your brain automatically translates that in what I'm doing currently is not good enough. And if we change that to a way that your brain accepts, like, hey, what we're now saying is actually something I can become better in, or it can be beneficial for me, that is where your motivation becomes internal. And that is often, for most people, a really good trigger to start changing their behavior.